He sat on the pearlescent ground below him, one knee propped while his arm rested atop. He was contemplating, glaring through his furrowed brow at the two paths that lied ahead of him, for which each path had its balance of consequences that were unbeknownst to man. The scowl plaguing over the dark-haired heir's marble face was rightfully placed. He hadn't known why or how he had ended up in this predicament. Two doors, he thought to himself, what are the consequences that will greet me? His black eyes closed swiftly, exhaling before standing to his feet. The man bit at the inside of his cheek, nervously walking to the black door that rested to the left. Vasilis's mouth became dry as he gulped down, nervously extending his long and shaking fingers outward to grab the silver doorknob. He exhaled loudly, pushing the door open with unease. To what lay behind the door was nothing he had expected. It was even a comforting sight, for his home, no, his kingdom of Atlantis, laid within the threshold of the ominous doorway. A smile was strewed across his cocky and confident face as he stepped foot through the unknown entity. Vasilis entered into his homeland. He had been spit out within the gardens that had been designed and constructed by his great-grandfather father to honor the alliance between man and God. Stories had said the structure was built to be a beacon meant to connect the two lands, the human realm and Olympus itself. I walked throughout the giant crystal-forged dome, small rainbows raining down over the mass vegetation that thrived within. The centerpiece to the botanical haven had been a golden orb that rested in the hands of a marble-sculpted statue of Zeus. I took a deep breath in, breathing in the warm greenhouse air. A mixture of a sweet and soothing aroma entered through my nose. I made the correct choice, he stated outward as he smiled at the sky, Vasilis's broad shoulders relaxing from their previous tense state. Nothing feels different. His smile quickly transformed into a glare. No matter the choice he made, there had to be a form of deleterious effects. There had been only one mortal he had worried for, a man who went by the name Philios. He ruled over the Greek Isles and had been Vasilis's first love interest. If there will be adverse effects, they will surely come for the one who is closest to me. I spoke aloud, trying to rid my mind of the awful thoughts. Vasilis. A woman's voice had cast over his body, causing him to jump from the unexpected presence. I am faster than the others. She sat on the concrete bench that sat fixed to a small koi pond. Who? He shook his head quickly. Goddess Demeter. The young prince was scared to look the Greek goddess in her face. I wanted to see you before the men got to you. She spoke with a smooth voice, her eyes never leaving him. Vasilis mustered the courage to look at her. His dark eyes widened in shock as the image he was met with was a beautiful woman. You, his eyes fluttered open and closed as he tried to get a clearer look. Her doe eyes were large and blue, her skin an olive complexion, while her long flowing hair shinned a much brighter golden color. His weary eyes traced aside from her. Very few beings look away from the sight of me. You are one of the first I've encountered. Her voice spoke as if it were honey being poured into warm tea. Your son was made in your image. He gulped loudly as he muttered the phrase aloud. Yes, and for that reason, Philios is my most beautiful creation. Due to your poor choice, I had to be a witness of his demise. Her sweet voice changed over into a calloused and rough tone. Perhaps you should look to your brother Posidion for true blame. Vasilis finally gained the courage to glare upwards at the woman. Oh, my brother has yet to receive his punishment, which entails yours as well. She snuffed me. You must know today will be your last day on this earthly realm. She glared down at me. Why? The prince spit out while standing to his feet from the warm ground. The man stood a foot over the goddess, his brow furrowing again. What did you do to him? He had almost growled aloud as Vasilis's body began to shake from the fear of his choice. Perhaps he had walked through the wrong door, made the wrong choice. Prince Vasilis, you and your lover will be reunited in death. Her once deep blue eyes began to change into black. The crystal dome above us cracked down the middle. The change in pressure began directly atop of the two. The goddess's long fingers grabbed his face, nails digging into his prominent jawline. Her face moved closer to the man. Demeter's skin was hot, the heat bellowing off her marble completion could be felt from a foot away. Fear had coursed throughout the body of Vasilis, rendering his limbs useless, but he wouldn't allow himself to crack. not now with all the questions that remained. Move your arm, move your damn arm, Vasilis screamed at himself internally, I will not die here. He slowly lifted his left arm from his side, clinging his fingers tightly to the goddess's bare neck. Vasilis's teeth ground together in fear as he looked over the woman with wide eyes. He didn't want to miss a moment as he watched the being's face turn red as the oxygen was deprived of her lungs. Her hand still affixed to the prince's face. The dome ahead cracked once again as energy increased above the two. I'll make sure you suffer for what you have done to the one I loved. I yelled out. Demeter's hands grabbed the muscular forearm trying to break the grip. Vasilis's right hand met violently with her neck as he squeezed her soft neck. A loud crack pulsed from within the woman's body as her spine snapped. The dark-haired man laughed helplessly aloud as he watched the once goddess of harvest thud to the ground. The sky above cracked loudly with anger. He stood frozen in place once again as tears streamed down his cheeks. The heavy rain poured from the dark sky above, leaking down into the garden. The marble statue behind Vasilis cracked loudly, the golden orb that once rested in the. Vasilis's body was weak as he fell to his knees. A man towered over him as an unknown voice spoke deeply over me. You really shouldn't have killed her. The light-skinned man shook his head, looking to the dead goddess, then to Vasilis. Your city will now crumble. Nothing will be left after we're done. This is the penalty for your wrong choices. He glared through me, his broad arms shot out. Vasilis had come from royalty, but had only ever heard stories of the mighty Zeus. The stories were true as he witnessed the god's eye flush to white. What extreme pressure he carries with him. Vasilis examined his broad chest, white beard, tied-up hair, and white cloak wrapped around the god's body. His eyes widened in utter terror as screams from outside the crystal dome shouted around them. I allowed both Poseidon and Prometheus too much freedom. Zeus's muscles flexed before me as the ground shook. Vasilis's eyes were wide as his beautiful city began to crack and pop with fire. The high rises that towered over the sea had begun to collapse and crash into the vast ocean around them. Stop! The prince screamed out. This couldn't be real life. All the hard work he and his ancestors had completed would be reduced to nothing. If you had chosen the door to the right, I would have spared you and your metropolis. The voice boomed as if it were thunder over the naive man. The god looked behind the air, extending his hand out. The golden orb that had rolled onto the concrete began to bubble and change form completely. It was as if the orb had some kind of magnetic properties to it. As it flew to the god's hand, it slowly changed from a ball to a long staff. Vasilis closed his eyes tightly as the ground rumbled and quaked below him. Zeus stood directly over the dark-haired heir. You will be no more. His staff struck Vasilis across the neck, blood squirting out as the ruler fell to the ground aside from the goddess who was once known as Demeter. Poseidon closed his eyes as he breathed outward loudly. Forgive me, Demeter. The man's arms lifted the woman from the blood-covered ground.